It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Tom sat on the couch, flipping through TV channels, looking for something to watch. His 15-year-old son, Jack, sat beside him, lazily eating a bag of chips. The house was peaceful, and the soft sound of the television filled the air. Linda, Tom's wife, and Jack's mother had gone to the store. She would be back soon, but until then, it was just the two of them. Tom smiled, enjoying this rare father-son time. Jack usually liked to play video games or be on his phone, but today, he was sitting with his dad, watching TV. Tom stopped on an old movie channel. The screen flickered, showing a dark, grainy film. The sound was low, just a soft hum of eerie music. Jack frowned and shifted on the couch. "Dad, this movie looks weird," Jack said, his voice uncertain. Tom hesitated for a moment. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Linda would be home in about an hour. There was still time. "Just watch for a bit," Tom said, his voice calm but slightly tense. Jack didn't understand why his dad was acting this way. Normally, Tom liked action movies or comedies, but this film was different. It looked old, mysterious, and a little scary. The screen showed a dark room, lit only by a small flickering lamp. Shadows stretched across the walls, and a cold wind seemed to blow through the screen. A woman lay sleeping in a bed, her face peaceful, her breathing slow. Then, a shadow moved. Jack sat up straighter. "Dad, what is this movie?" Tom's hands rested on his knees, his fingers slightly curled. His eyes stayed locked on the screen. "Just watch," he whispered. Jack felt a strange feeling in his chest. Something wasn't right. On the screen, the shadowy figure stepped closer to the sleeping woman. His face was hidden, his movements slow and careful. He leaned over the woman, close enough to touch her. A low whisper filled the room. The figure spoke, but the words were unclear. Jack's stomach twisted. "Dad, this is creepy." Tom's expression didn't change. His breathing was steady, his body still. Jack turned back to the screen. The woman in the bed stirred slightly, her lips parting as if she sensed something near her. Jack felt his heartbeat in his ears. "Dad, why are we watching this?" Tom finally moved. He turned to Jack, his face pale, his eyes dark. "Because I think I've seen it before," he said. Jack's breath caught in his throat. "Before?" His hands felt cold as he looked back at the screen. The woman's face, it looked familiar. Too familiar. Jack's voice trembled. "Dad, she looks like Mom." Tom swallowed hard but said nothing. The screen flickered again. The shadowy figure raised a hand. Something sharp gleamed in the dim light. Jack's hands clenched into fists. "Dad, turn it off!" Tom didn't move. His eyes were locked on the TV, his breathing heavy. "I can't," he said. "I need to see this." Jack's heart pounded. Why? Why did Dad need to see this? And why did it feel like this wasn't just a movie? The house was silent. The TV flickered, and Jack had the horrible feeling that something very bad was about to happen. Jack sat frozen on the couch, his eyes locked on the screen. The movie looked old, but something about it felt disturbingly real. The dark bedroom on the screen wasn't just any room. It looked exactly like their own house. Jack's voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, that room, it looks like ours." Tom swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't look away. "I know," he muttered. Jack's stomach twisted. The eerie glow from the TV flickered against the walls, making the living room feel colder. The woman on the screen shifted in bed, her breathing deep and slow. Jack's heart skipped a beat. She looked just like Mom, the soft waves of her dark hair, the delicate way she curled under the blanket. It was her. Jack grabbed Tom's sleeve. Dad, is this some kind of prank? Tom exhaled slowly. I don't think so. His voice was tight, almost strained, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. Jack looked back at the screen. The shadowy figure in the room stood still, watching, the sleeping woman. He moved closer, his steps silent. Jack's chest tightened. Dad, if this is a joke, it's not funny. Tom finally turned to look at him. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. Jack, listen to me. I didn't put this on. Jack shook his head. But how is this possible? Tom didn't answer. His hand clenched into a fist on his lap. The TV flickered again. The camera zoomed in on the shadowy figure. Jack's body went cold. The man in the movie, the dark figure, standing in the room, he looked exactly like Tom. Jack's breath caught. He felt like the walls were closing in. Dad, that man. His voice broke. He looks like you. Tom's hands shook. I know. The words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Jack stared at his father, feeling something he'd never felt before, fear. He had always known his dad as strong, confident, loving. He was the man who kissed Mom on the forehead every morning, who pulled her close after dinner and danced with her in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. But right now, Tom looked different. He looked like a man who had seen something he couldn't explain. The movie continued. The shadowy man reached for the sleeping woman, his fingers hovering over her cheek, just inches away. The eerie music played softly, almost like a heartbeat. Jack's voice shook. Dad, turn it off. Tom didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the screen. The shadowy figure bent closer to the woman. His lips moved. He whispered something, but the sound was too low to hear. Jack grabbed the remote and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. And again. The TV stayed on. The movie kept playing. Jack's pulse raced. Dad? What's going on? Tom finally tore his gaze from the screen and grabbed the remote from Jack's hands. He pressed every button, power, volume, input, but nothing worked. Jack's breathing became shallow. He stood up, stepping away from the couch. His legs felt weak. This isn't normal, he said. Tom exhaled sharply, trying to stay calm. I know. The movie flickered again. The camera zoomed in on the woman's face. She was waking up. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion washing over her features. She turned her head slightly, sensing something near her. Then, her eyes widened. In terror, Jack's skin prickled. She saw something, but before she could scream, the screen cut to black. Silence filled the room. The only sound was Jack's heavy breathing. The TV was off now, but the air in the house felt different. Charged, like something unseen was still there, watching them. Jack's fingers trembled. Dad, what was that? Tom's shoulders sagged as he exhaled. I don't know. Jack turned to look at his father. He saw something in Tom's eyes he had never seen before. Fear. A soft noise came from the hallway. A creak. A slow step. Jack's heart slammed in his chest. His entire body stiffened. Someone was in the house, and it wasn't Mom. The living room felt colder now. Jack's skin prickled as he turned his head toward the hallway. Creak. Another slow step echoed in the silence. Someone, or something, was there. Jack's fingers clenched into fists. He glanced at his father. Tom's face was tense, his eyes locked on the dark hallway. Dad, Jack whispered. Who's there? Tom didn't answer. He slowly rose from the couch, his body stiff. The dim light from the TV screen cast shadows across his face, making him look almost like the eerie figure from the movie. Jack's pulse raced. He wished Mom was home. She always made everything feel safe. He thought about how she would laugh when Dad kissed her forehead, how she would rest her head against his shoulder after a long day. But Mom wasn't here, and something was waiting. In the hallway, another sound, closer this time. Tom took a deep breath. "Stay here," he whispered. Jack grabbed his father's wrist. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice shaking. Tom placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. But the way his voice trembled told Jack that it wasn't okay. Jack swallowed hard and let go. Tom stepped forward, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. The house fell silent. Jack's breath was shaky. He forced himself to stay still, listening. Then, a loud thud. Jack jumped to his feet. "Dad?" No answer. Panic shot through his veins. He took a slow step forward. The hallway stretched before him, dark and endless. Jack hesitated. Then, gathering his courage, he stepped inside. The air felt heavy. The house was the same, but something was wrong. Jack reached the end of the hall and peeked around the corner. His breath caught in his throat. Tom was standing still. His body was tense, his shoulders tight. His back was turned. Jack's voice shook. "Dad?" Tom didn't move. He just stood there, frozen. Jack took a step closer. Then he saw it. A man stood in front of Tom. At first, Jack thought it was a shadow, but no. It was a person. Tall, dressed in black. His face hidden in the dim light. But when he moved, Jack's stomach dropped. The man looked exactly like Tom. Jack's blood turned to ice. His knees felt weak. He gripped the wall to keep himself from collapsing. The figure stood eerily still, mirroring Tom's posture. His head tilted slightly, watching Tom with cold, empty eyes. Jack felt sick. His mind screamed that this wasn't possible. This was some kind of nightmare. The figure took a slow step forward. His shoes barely made a sound against the floor. Then, he spoke. "You shouldn't have watched." Jack's breath hitched. The voice. It was his dad's voice. But it was wrong. Distorted. Like an echo in a dark cave. Tom's hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice strong but edged with fear. The figure didn't answer. He just smiled. Then, he reached into his pocket. Something silver gleamed in the dim light. A knife. Jack's stomach twisted in horror. It was the same knife from the movie. The same knife the shadowy figure had held over the sleeping woman. Over Mom. Jack couldn't breathe. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body refused to move. The figure lifted the knife slightly, tilting his head. His smile widened. Jack's heart pounded. "Dad, do something." Tom's eyes never left the man in front of him. His muscles tensed, ready. The figure took another step forward. His presence filled the hallway like a growing storm. Then, a loud bang. The front door opened. "Tom? Jack?" Mom was home. Jack's entire body sagged with relief. The sound of Linda's voice cut through the fear like a knife. The shadowy figure stopped moving. His expression darkened. His fingers tightened around the knife. Tom exhaled sharply. "Linda, stay outside." But it was too late. Linda stepped inside, her arms full of grocery bags. She smiled, oblivious to the horror unfolding just a few feet away. "I got your favorite snacks, Jack," she said cheerfully. Then she paused, noticing the tension in the air. "What's wrong?" Jack turned his head back toward the figure, but he was gone. The hallway was empty. Only Tom stood there, his shoulders still stiff, his hands shaking slightly. Jack's breathing was ragged. "Dad," he whispered. Tom looked down at his trembling hands. He seemed lost, as if trying to convince himself that what just happened wasn't real. Linda frowned. "Tom?" She stepped closer, concern in her voice. "What's going on?" Tom didn't answer. He only turned toward the dark hallway one last time, because even though the figure was gone, they all felt that something was still there. Linda stood at the doorway, her eyes shifting between Tom and Jack. The tension in the house felt thick, almost suffocating. She knew her husband well. Tom was strong, steady, her safe place. But right now, he looked different. His shoulders were stiff, his hands clenched. His breathing was uneven. Something was wrong. She set the grocery bags on the table. "Tom?" she asked gently, stepping closer. "What's going on?" Tom blinked as if waking from a trance. He turned to face her, his lips parting, but no words came out. Jack's face was pale. His hands trembled slightly. "Mom?" he whispered. "There was a man here," Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" Jack swallowed hard. "He looked like Dad." Linda's stomach tightened. "Like Dad?" Tom ran a hand through his hair, his body still tense. "It wasn't just that," he said slowly. "It was like he was me." A cold shiver ran down Linda's spine. "Tom, that doesn't make sense." Tom let out a slow, shaky breath. "I know." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I swear. He was right there." He pointed toward the hallway. "And he had a knife." Linda's heart pounded. "A knife?" She turned to Tom, but he didn't. Deny it, he didn't call it a joke. He just stood there, looking haunted. For the first time in their marriage, Linda saw something in Tom's eyes that she had never seen before. Fear. She reached for his hand. His fingers were ice cold. "Tom," she whispered, "tell me everything." Tom looked at her then. His gaze softened, if only for a moment. He wanted to protect her, just like he always had. But this was something he couldn't explain. Still, she was his wife, his love, his anchor. So he told her. About the strange movie, about the shadowy figure, about the way the man had moved, spoken, smiled. As if he was Tom himself. Linda listened, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't interrupt, even though her mind screamed that this was impossible. When Tom finished, silence filled the room. Linda inhaled slowly. She looked at Jack, who nodded. He wasn't lying. She turned back to Tom. "Where is he now?" she asked. Tom shook his head. "Gone. When you came in, he disappeared." Linda's pulse raced. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something dark and unknown. She wanted to say it was just stress. Maybe Tom was tired. Maybe Jack had imagined it. But deep down, she knew. Something wasn't right. She reached out and cupped Tom's face gently. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Tom's tense expression softened at her touch. His eyes, filled with confusion, fear, and love, searched hers. "I don't know," he admitted. Linda leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, warm, reassuring. For a brief moment, Tom let himself sink into it. Her lips were familiar, safe. The warmth of her touch reminded him that this was real. She was real. Jack cleared his throat awkwardly. Guys? I'm still here?" Linda smiled slightly and pulled away, but her hand remained in Tom's. She turned to Jack. "Let's check the house," she said. "Make sure no one's here." Jack hesitated but nodded. Tom exhaled and straightened his shoulders. Whatever had happened, he wouldn't let it touch his family again. Together, they checked every room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, the bathrooms. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no open windows, no footprints, just the silence. Linda let out a deep breath. "See?" she said, trying to sound calm. "No one's here." But Tom wasn't convinced. He walked over to the TV. The screen was black, but his reflection stared back at him. Slowly, he reached for the remote and pressed play. The TV buzzed to life. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The movie was still there. The my screen flickered. The dark bedroom appeared again, and then the shadowy figure turned its head. It was looking directly at Tom. Tom froze. His chest tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears. Then, the figure smiled. Tom's blood turned to ice. He dropped the remote. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Linda and Jack rushed over. "What is it?" Linda asked. Tom pointed at the screen, his breath shaky. "He's looking at me." Jack's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God." Linda turned to the TV. Her heart stopped. The figure in the movie wasn't just watching Tom, he was mimicking him. The exact same stance, the exact same frozen expression, like a perfect reflection. A low whisper crackled through the speakers. Tom's voice. But he wasn't speaking. The voice on the screen whispered softly, almost lovingly, "I'm coming." The screen went black. The room was silent. Linda's hand tightened around Tom's. Jack grabbed his father's arm, his breath shallow. No one spoke. They just stood there, staring at the dark screen. Because deep down, they all knew. This wasn't over, and whatever had stepped out of that movie wasn't done with them yet. The room was silent. Linda, Tom, and Jack stood frozen, their eyes locked on the dark TV screen. The eerie whisper, "I'm coming," still echoed in their minds. Tom swallowed hard, his hand tightening around Linda's. She felt his pulse racing beneath his skin. Jack's breath was shallow. "Dad." His voice trembled. "That was your voice." Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. Linda turned toward him, searching his face. "Tom, talk to me," she whispered. Tom exhaled shakily, his mind spinning. This doesn't make sense." He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. That man, he's not just copying me. He hesitated. "He's becoming me." A chill ran down Linda's spine. She had never seen Tom like this. He was always the strong one, the protector. But tonight, he looked like a man caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Linda reached up and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "Tom, listen to me," she said gently. "You are here, with me, with Jack. That thing, it's just a movie." Tom shook his head. "No, it's more than that." He glanced at the TV as if expecting the figure to appear again. "It's watching us. It knows us." Jack stepped closer. Maybe we should leave." His voice was small, uncertain. Tom clenched his jaw. "No, I won't run from this." Linda felt a mix of fear and love swell in her chest. This was her husband, the man who always stood his ground, who always protected them. Even now, when his own reflection was haunting him, he refused to back down. But she was scared. She reached for his hands, squeezing them. "Then we face it together." Tom looked at her, his eyes softening for a moment. He nodded. Jack cleared his throat. "Okay, so what do we do?" Tom exhaled. "We watch." Jack's eyes widened. "What?" Tom picked up the remote, his grip firm. "If this thing is trying to get to me, I need to know why." Linda felt her stomach twist. "Tom, are you sure?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "If I don't face it, it won't stop." Linda hesitated, then slowly nodded. She hated this, hated the idea of Tom diving deeper into this nightmare. But she couldn't let him do it alone. She took his hand again. "Then we do this together." Jack groaned. "This is the worst idea ever." Tom pressed play. The screen flickered back to life. At first, the movie was the same. The dark bedroom, the sleeping woman, the shadowy figure. But then, it changed. The camera zoomed in. The woman in the bed turned her head. Linda gasped. It was her. Not just someone who looked like her. It was her. The same soft waves of dark hair, the same delicate features, the same way she breathed when she was deep in sleep. Jack's voice was a whisper. "Mom." Linda felt cold. That's not possible. But the worst part came next. The shadowy figure leaned over the bed, and for the first time, his face was fully visible. Tom's own face stared back at them from the screen. Linda's breath hitched. Her fingers dug into Tom's hand. "Tom," she whispered. Tom's jaw clenched. His own eyes stared at him from the screen. Cold, empty. Smiling. Then, in the movie, the shadow Tom reached toward Linda's sleeping figure. His hand hovered over her cheek, just like before. But this time, he didn't stop. His fingers brushed against her skin. The real Linda flinched. A sudden coldness swept over her. Her chest tightened. She could feel it. Tom yanked her close. "Linda?" She gasped for breath, her body trembling. The TV screen glitched. The scene flickered. Shadow Tom turned his head and looked straight at them. Linda's heart stopped. Jack stumbled back. He's looking at us." Tom stood in front of Linda protectively. "Turn it off!" he barked. Jack fumbled with the remote, his hands shaking. He pressed every button. The movie kept playing. Shadow Tom's lips curled into a smirk. And then, he spoke. "She belongs to me." Linda's blood ran cold. Tom snapped. He grabbed the TV, shaking it. "Stay away from my wife," he shouted. The screen cracked. The image vanished. Silence. Heavy breathing filled the room. Linda clung to Tom, her heart pounding. Jack stared at the broken TV. Did we stop it?" No one answered. Tom pulled Linda against his chest, holding her tight. She buried her face in his shoulder, his warmth the only thing keeping her grounded. His voice was low, full of quiet rage. "Whatever this thing is, it's not done." Linda lifted her head. Her hands trembled as she cupped Tom's face. "Then neither are we," she whispered. Tom exhaled. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. For a moment, they stayed like that, silent, close, their hearts beating as one. Then, a sound, a low hum. Linda's phone. She slowly reached for it, her hands still shaking. A new message. From an unknown. "Number." She hesitated, then opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. The message was simple. "See you soon." Linda's hands went numb. Tom grabbed the phone, his eyes narrowing. Then, from the broken TV, a single whisper crackled through the speakers. A deep, familiar voice. Tom's voice. "I told you." The room was dark. The whisper from the broken TV still echoed in Linda's ears. "I told you. I'm coming." Her breath came in short, shaky gasps. She could feel Tom's grip tightening around her, his warmth keeping her grounded. Jack stood frozen, his face pale with fear. Then, the lights flickered back on. The silence that followed was worse than the darkness. Linda's phone was still in her hand, the message glowing on the screen. "See you soon." Tom took the phone from her, his jaw clenched. His knuckles turned white as he gripped it. "This has to stop," he muttered. His voice was low, full of quiet rage. "Whoever this is, whatever this is, I won't let it touch you." Linda swallowed hard. She reached for his face, forcing him to look at her. "Tom, we're in this together." Tom's expression softened, but the tension in his body didn't fade. He kissed her forehead gently. "I know," he whispered. Jack fidgeted beside them. "Okay, so what do we do?" Tom took a deep breath. "We need to understand what's happening. This thing, it's not just copying me anymore. It's trying to replace me. Linda shivered. You think it's real? Tom nodded. I don't just think. I know. Jack glanced at the broken TV. What if we check the movie again? Tom hesitated, then nodded. Not on the TV. We use my laptop. Linda's stomach twisted. Tom, are you sure? I need to see what's happening. She knew he was right, but she was terrified. Tom grabbed his laptop from the shelf and opened it on the table. Jack and Linda stood behind him as he pulled up the movie file. He hit play. The screen flickered. The familiar dark bedroom appeared. But something was different. The bed was empty. Linda's heart pounded. Where am I? Tom's hands shook. It's changed. Jack let out a sharp breath. Wait, look. The camera in the movie panned across the dark room, to the doorway, to the mirror, and standing there was Tom. Not the shadowy figure, not some blurry imitation. It was him. Same clothes, same posture, same face. Tom froze. The movie Tom turned slowly. He stared into the camera, into them. Then he smirked. Jack cursed under his breath. That's not you, right? Linda's stomach twisted. Tom? Tom's breath was unsteady. I don't know. The other Tom in the movie reached forward, and suddenly the laptop screen glitched, the video distorted, the sound warped, then knock. Knock, knock. Linda's blood ran cold. The sound wasn't coming from the laptop. It was coming from the front door. Jack grabbed Tom's arm. Dad, don't open it. Tom stood slowly. His body was rigid, every muscle tense. The knocking came again. Louder. Linda grabbed his hand. Tom, please. He turned to her, his eyes dark, unreadable. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. I have to, he said softly. She shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. No, you don't. Tom leaned in and kissed her, deep, slow, like it was the last time. Then he pulled away and walked to the door. Knock, knock, knock. Jack grabbed Linda's hand, gripping it tight. Tom placed his hand on the doorknob, a deep breath. Then he opened it. Silence. The hallway was empty. Linda exhaled in relief. No one's... Then Tom took a step back, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jack peered over his shoulder. His body went stiff. Oh my God. Linda's heart pounded as she stepped forward, and then she saw it. Him, standing just outside the door. Tom, a perfect copy. Same height, same eyes, same clothes, but something was wrong. His skin looked just a little too pale. His smile was just a little too wide, and his eyes, empty. Linda clutched Tom's arm. Tom, come inside. The other Tom tilted his head. Linda, he said smoothly. Her breath caught. His voice was the same. Exactly the same. The real Tom took a step forward, placing himself between Linda and the imposter. What do you want? Tom's voice was sharp, dangerous. The other Tom smirked. I just want what's mine. Tom's fists clenched. She's not yours. The other Tom chuckled. It was an exact copy of Tom's laugh. But there was something cold underneath. Then, he took a step forward. Linda's breath hitched. Stay away from us. The other Tom ignored her. His eyes locked onto Tom. Then, he reached out his hand. Tom didn't move. He didn't flinch. Linda could feel the tension in his body. The other Tom's smile widened, and then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, he said, Let's see who the real Tom is. The air was thick with silence. Linda clung to Tom's arm, her heart pounding. Jack stood frozen behind them, his breath shallow. And in the doorway, The other Tom stood smiling. His face was the same. His voice was the same. But his eyes, they were empty, dark, wrong. The real Tom clenched his fists. His whole body was tense, like a man preparing for battle. "Let's see who the real Tom is," the imposter had said. Tom took a deep breath. His voice was low, dangerous. "I am the real Tom?" the other Tom chuckled. "Are you sure?" Then, he moved, fast, too fast. Before Linda could react, the other Tom grabbed her wrist. His hand was ice cold. Linda gasped, trying to pull away, but his grip was strong. Too strong. Tom snapped. He lunged forward, shoving the imposter away. "Don't touch her!" The other Tom stumbled back, but his smirk never faded. Linda's skin burned where he had touched her, like his fingers had left behind a shadow. Tom pulled her behind him, shielding her. "Jack, get your mom upstairs," he ordered. Jack hesitated. "Dad, now," Tom barked. Jack grabbed Linda's arm and pulled her toward the stairs, but she didn't want to go. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Tom turned to her, his expression softening for just a second. He cupped her face gently. "Linda, please." Tears burned in her eyes. She knew what he was doing. He was protecting her. But at what cost? She hesitated. Then Jack pulled her up the stairs. The last thing she saw before they reached the top was Tom and the imposter standing face to face, two identical men, but only one was real. Downstairs, the two Toms stood in silence. The imposter smiled. "She loves you." Tom's fists tightened. "Stay away from my family." The other Tom tilted his head. "But why would she choose you, when she could have me?" Tom's rage burned. "I won't let you take her," he growled. The imposter's smile grew wider. "Then stop me." And then he attacked. Tom barely had time to react before the other Tom lunged. Their bodies collided. The impact sent them crashing into the coffee table. Glass shattered. Tom rolled away just in time to dodge a punch. He kicked out, knocking the imposter back, but the other Tom only laughed. Tom's breath came in sharp gasps. This thing, it was strong. Too strong. The imposter smirked. "You're only human, Tom." Tom wiped blood from his lip. "That's the difference between us." The imposter's smile faltered. Tom took a step forward. "You might look like me." Another step. "You might sound like me." His voice was steady. Strong. "But you'll never be me." The other Tom's expression darkened. "You're wrong." Then, he lunged again. Tom was ready. He sidestepped at the last second, using the imposter's own momentum against him. The other Tom crashed into the wall, and in that moment, Tom saw his chance. He grabbed a shard of broken glass from the table, and before the imposter could move, Tom drove it into his chest. The other Tom froze. His eyes widened. Then, he screamed. Not a human scream. Something distorted, twisted. Tom stumbled, back, breathing hard. The imposter's body began to change. His skin darkened. His features warped, and then he was gone. Vanished. Like he had never been there at all. Tom stood there, chest rising and falling, the shard of glass still in his hand. Then, he heard her. "Tom?" He turned. Linda stood at the bottom of the stairs, tears in her eyes. She ran to him. Tom barely had time to react before she threw her arms around him, holding him tight. He felt her warmth, her heartbeat. She was real. He buried his face in her hair, his arms wrapping around her. "It's over," he whispered. Linda squeezed him tighter. "You came back to me." Tom pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. He brushed a stray tear from her cheek. "I never left." And then, he kissed her, slow, deep, like he never wanted to let go. Jack cleared his throat awkwardly. Are we just gonna ignore what just happened? Linda laughed softly, still pressed against Tom's chest. We'll talk about it in the morning. Tom smiled, pulling her even closer. Yeah, he murmured. Right now. I just want to be with my family. Linda placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Always. She kissed him again, slow and sweet, and for the first time that night, the house was quiet. The nightmare was over, or so they thought. Because in the broken TV screen, a faint shadow moved, and somewhere, deep inside the glass, a pair of empty eyes watched, still smiling.